The college football transfer portal is officially open, and the Louisville Cardinals are hosting two visitors on campus on Monday.
You are Locked On Louisville, your daily podcast on the Louisville Cardinals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Card Nation, what's going on, everyone? Welcome into this Monday edition of the Locked On Louisville podcast. I'm your host, Dalton Pence. This is my fifth year covering the University of Louisville, third year hosting this show, and I want to take the time to personally thank you all for making us your first listen of the day. Just a reminder, the show is free and available on all streaming services 5 days a week, your team every day. Now, today's episode of the show brought to you by FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win that first $5 bet. All you have to do, visit FanDuel.com to get started. Today, Monday, December 9th, the Louisville football program is starting their offseason transfer portal campaign. They are hosting two transfer portal players on campus on Monday: Charlotte edge rusher Clowney and Purdue offensive lineman Mahamane Moussa. We'll discuss what both could bring to the Cardinals program and more. We'll discuss Louisville's tough loss to Duke in the men's basketball realm. And then to conclude the show, we'll talk about how the College Football Playoff Committee's decision to put SMU into the field over Alabama is encouraging for the Louisville Cardinals moving forward. So I will start off by saying that it's going to be a wild month or couple months for the Louisville football program. We know how Jeff Brohm operates in the portal. This is his third offseason as the Louisville head coach. He has this down to a science of being able to bring in one of the best transfer portal classes each and every offseason. Things are going to move very quickly for the Louisville Cardinals. Now, it's going to get overwhelming. There are going to be a ton of names, and it's going to be challenging to keep up with everything. One thing that we're going to try to do on this show, that I'm going to try to do, is keep you as updated and as in the know, informed, if you will, as much as I possibly can. At times, there's only going to be, there's only so much that I can talk about per show and per week. We're going to do our best to stay in the moment, discuss the commits when they come, or discuss the commits when they make their decisions, discuss the visitors when they come to campus, and much, much more. We begin on Monday, December 9th, where the underclassmen portal is officially open. We're seeing a ton of movement across college football. The two players that Louisville will be hosting, however, are not underclassmen, two players that will be on campus on Monday for Louisville. The first is Charlotte edge rusher Clowney. And this is a pretty interesting recruitment because, you look at social media, and social media doesn't necessarily represent what school is interested in what player, but I see fans of a whole bunch of top teams saying, go get this guy. And this was a pretty interesting career here because I remember when he committed to LSU and then decommitted, and depending on who you talk to, I don't know if this was true or not. I can't validate these rumors, but it seemed like maybe LSU encouraged him to look elsewhere. I don't know the full story, and if I'm wrong, then obviously forgive me, but it seems like that's the rumors from the LSU side. But he ended up flipping or signing with Ole Miss, and he spent the first 3 years of his college career with the Rebels and didn't really get much time. Didn't have over 5 tackles in any of the seasons with Ole Miss. And he ends up transferring to Charlotte to get onto the field. And he got onto the field pretty quickly. And over the past 2 years, the Baltimore, Maryland native has been able to carve out a role in the 49ers defense and be one of the best defenders on that team. Now, you look at the stats, and sometimes the stats are a little bit misleading. The tackle numbers are pretty encouraging for an off-ball linebacker. 59 total tackles, ended up with 4.5 total sacks in 2 seasons, no forced fumbles, no interceptions, no pass deflections, etc. So 6'4", 250 pounds, projects, in my opinion, if he were to come to Louisville to play the guard position as the, outside linebacker on the line of scrimmage. I'm not sure that he's a traditional defensive end in this defense. But you look at the stats, and one thing that it shows is just how good of a run defender Clowney is. But it also kind of highlights that the pass rush hasn't been there in terms of the total number of sacks. And this is kind of where I'm at with this is you go back to the last portal window where Louisville took a couple players that the statistics might not necessarily suggest that, hey, this guy is definitely a player that can contribute a good amount at the Power 4 level. And I'm looking at guys like Rutgers transfer Rene Conga, who didn't have much statistical production to his name whatsoever. Players like Tremel Logan, the South Florida transfer, but both of those guys ended up playing a key role for Louisville this year. So I think it really just is a matter of Jeff Brohm looking at these players and saying, okay, the stats might not back it up, but this guy has a skill set that we believe we can maximize, and we believe he can help our team. And for those wondering, well, how serious is the interest from Louisville? I will tell you that it's going to be the same as it was the past couple windows. The Cardinals are not going to bring a player in just for the sake of having them visit. If a player visits Louisville, there is concrete evidence from Louisville's side, and Louisville has a very good success rate when it comes to players visiting campus and then ultimately committing in the portal. We know how Jeff Brohm and company operate in the portal. They like to, get their ducks in a row and hit the window hard and get their commitments because you have to. If you're replacing so many players, you have to go ahead and get the commitments. Now, I think at the very least, if Louisville were to get Damon Clowney to commit, I think that at the very least, this is a depth move with the potential ceiling for a starting level role here for Clowney. I think that his talent is better than the statistical output suggests, sort of like Rene Conga. And, I'm trusting the scouting here that Louisville can, bring in players that can play at the Power 4 level. And I think that Damon Clowney, an All-American Athletic Conference third-team selection this past season, I forgot to mention, which you probably already know, he is Jadeveon Clowney's cousin. The other player that will be on campus on Monday is Purdue offensive line transfer Mahamane Moussa. I believe I'm saying that right. If I'm not, forgive me. I think it's Mahamane is how you say his first name. 6'4", 300-pound offensive lineman for Purdue. Has played under Jeff Brohm, was recruited by Jeff Brohm. It wouldn't surprise me to see Louisville go after multiple guys that Brohm either coached or recruited while he was at Purdue because there's a level of familiarity there. And then when you're trying to bring in so many players via the portal, scouting is sometimes an issue because you just don't have the luxury of having as much time to make a decision on a certain player. Now, Moussa, being 6'4", 300 pounds, has played both left tackle and left guard in his career at Purdue. I will mention before we move on from Damon Clowney, he does have 1 year remaining, in my opinion. I think he has 1 year remaining. Forgive me, my mind's going all over the place. But back to Moussa, 30 starts over his career at Purdue, 40 overall appearances. Like I said, played for Jeff Brohm. This past year, played mainly at left guard. So this is where things get pretty interesting. I will say that Louisville has done a really good job over the past 2 years with offensive line recruiting. The first year, they hit it out of the park with the guys they brought in. Second year, it looked like it was going to be a little iffy, right? The tackle spots were an issue, but overall, Louisville only allowed 15 sacks, and the offensive line did a lot better after a slow start to the year. So it's one of those things that I trust Jeff Brohm. I trust Richard Owens when it comes to recruiting the offensive line, especially transfers. But Jeff Brohm has some familiarity with Moussa. Now, this is the million-dollar question is, how much faith do you put in Pro Football Focus ratings? I know myself, it's sort of something I take with a grain of salt because I think it's a good reference point, but there's been many times where I've watched a game and I've thought, something about a performance, and then I look at the PFF ratings and they just don't match up with what I see. And granted, I'm not this grand football mind, but at the end of the day, this happens a lot, I feel like, and I'm like, I say that to say this. Moussa this past year was Purdue's lowest graded offensive lineman. So that's something you have to focus on. Is like, well, how much focus do you put on PFF ratings? How much of an emphasis are you putting on them? Now, could this have been, he switched a lot to left guard, which seems like, the interior is where he would play at the next level. Do you think that it's something that Jeff Brohm's like, I think that he could be really good here. He could at the very least be a depth piece for Louisville. He might even be able to slide back to playing the tackle spot. I'm not sure if this would be a starting level move for Louisville. It potentially could be. I think at the very least you're adding another body into the room because you're having to replace some players. So if Louisville were to go out and get a 3-year starter at the Power 4 level, despite how rough Purdue was this year, I think it would be a pretty decent addition. So something to focus on is usually if players visit in the portal for Louisville, most of the times they end up committing. So this will be something to focus on. Keep an eye out for both of these players. There are multiple players that are visiting this week. We will discuss those as the days roll around. But when we come back, we're going to transition over to the men's basketball side of things. Louisville looked really good at the start of the game against Duke, and then unfortunately they ran out of gas at the end and ended up losing to a top 10 team at the KFC Yum Center. But I am more encouraged now than I was a week ago, and we'll explain why on this Monday edition of the Locked On Louisville podcast. Nothing delivers comfort and joy quite like the unrivaled quality and taste of Omaha Steaks. It's guaranteed perfection in every single bite, and right now you can save on unforgettable gifts with 50% off site-wide at omahasteaks.com. Plus, score an extra $30 off with the promo code COLLEGE. With 5 generations of experience, they consistently deliver the world's best steak experience, and the gifting experts at Omaha Steaks have made it easy to deliver the perfect gift with thoughtfully curated gift packages featuring gourmet favorites, from legendary steaks to mouthwatering desserts and more. Save 50% off site-wide for a limited time at omahasteaks.com. Plus, our listeners get an extra $30 off with the promo code COLLEGE. That's 50% off at omahasteaks.com and an extra $30 off with the promo code COLLEGE. Minimum purchase may apply. Louisville fans, want to take the time to thank you all again for making this show your first listen of the day. Just a reminder, the show is free and available on all streaming services 5 days a week, your team every day. We'll get back to football talk here in the next segment, but we're not going to go a full week without talking about the basketball team. After a really, really worst-case scenario loss to Ole Miss last Tuesday, the Cardinals followed it up with a rather encouraging performance against Duke. Now, look, let's go ahead and discuss the elephant in the room. There are, in my opinion, no such thing as moral victories. No such thing. But don't mistake revealing positive and encouraging tidbits as claiming moral victories. Because at the end of the day, the only thing that matters to the Louisville Cardinals is what is in the win-loss column. The Cardinals are currently 5-4 after dropping they're on a 3-game losing streak. Oklahoma, Ole Miss, and Duke. Now, granted, tough competition, but I was coming into this Duke matchup thinking, okay, I'm not sure how well Louisville really matches up with the Blue Devils. You're playing what's likely going to be a number 1 pick. Cooper Flagg is one of the best players in the country. They have a really talented team in Durham. Duke has been battle-tested and just overall going to be a matchup that Louisville's just I was worried about. And the Cardinals opened it up, and they were making shots, and they had a 14-point lead in the first half, and they were playing really well. Now, they only went to halftime with a 4-point lead. But for the most part, I really liked what I saw from Pat Kelsey's team, because at the end of the day, well, what have we seen from the past 2 years is that the team just quits. So at the end of the day, I wanted to just see the effort matchup because, look, I know you hear that and you're like, well, how don't you want to see the team win? Duh. Yeah, we want to see the team win, but I'm not going to be naive enough to know that, like I said, the early portion of the season, very challenging. With 8 scholarship players, is Louisville favored to beat Duke? No. They were an 8.5-point underdog. I wanted to see Louisville keep it close. And they did. They battled in the second half. And then the last 10 minutes of the game, you could just tell they're exhausted. They ran out of gas. And that was that. Duke went on a stretch with about 8 minutes to go, and they never looked back. Louisville kept it respectable. But at the end of the day, they weren't able to battle back and get over the hump. Now, a couple things here. I was, looking overall, I was really impressed with Terrence Edwards' performance. He led all scorers with 21 points. Felt like he was really aggressive, and it was what Louisville needed. Kenai Roots was fantastic off the bench. He had 10 points and 6 rebounds, but his impact was much more than that. You saw that energy, that athleticism put on full display. He made some big-time plays, and it was nice to be able to see that happen for Louisville. But other than that, the Cardinals didn't shoot all that well after their little hot stretch in the first half. Rain Smith was 4 of 11. He had 13 points. Javon Hadley, 3 of 8, had 7 points, 8 rebounds. James Scott was 2 of 2. Noah Waterman, 0 for 3 from the field. He had 1.4 rebounds and was in foul trouble for the most part. Chucky Hepburn, a rough night for him, 2 of 11, 2 of 7 from deep. He had 8 points. It just goes to show you that I think that if Louisville wants to beat teams like this, they have to stop being so careless with the basketball. They had 15 turnovers. Duke ended up scoring 20 points off of Louisville turnovers. They only got out-rebounded by 1. They were 35% from the three-point line. So, I mean, the numbers aren't going to look terrible outside of the overall field goal percentage. I just feel like Louisville just has to continue to work on limiting second chance opportunities. They have to do better at cutting down the turnovers, just the careless mistakes. And I think that as this team continues to gel on the court, you're going to see those turnover numbers start to go down a little bit more. But against Duke is one of the best defensive teams in the country, according to KenPom. So, but what made me a little bit frustrated was seeing the unforced turnovers, getting the rebound and then throwing it back to the other team, dribbling into the lane and stopping and not knowing what to do after that. I mean, the self-enforced mistakes have to stop if you're going to try to pull off one of these upsets. And I think that you look at this saying that Louisville had a good first half, but the turnovers and the open threes that they gave up in that first half allowed Duke to get back into the game before the halftime intermission. What would have happened had Louisville kept better care of the basketball and played better defense and maybe not let Duke get within 4 points in the second half, to the point to where if Louisville were to run out of gas at the end of the game, then could they have built up enough of a cushion to be able to get the victory? Again, it's all hypotheticals, but at the end of the day, I felt more encouraged after the Duke loss than I did Ole Miss, because Ole Miss, I mean, yeah, they were down by 5 at one point in the second half, but the issues that you saw against Tennessee ended up popping up against Ole Miss as well. So I was hoping to myself, you're going to have another good crowd against Duke. You have a 5-star point guard watching. The last thing you want to do is get blown out again. Yes, 11 points is double digits, but it was a lot closer than that for 35 minutes of the game. So again, I'm not claiming moral victory here. Nobody is sitting here thinking, oh, we only lost by 11 to Duke. That's a win. No, it's not. No, it's not. For a person like myself who still thinks that this team can get to the NCAA bubble, a loss like this still hurts. So the Cardinals will try to bounce back. They play UTEP on Wednesday. This is a game that UTEP currently is 6-2. The only losses that they have are to San Jose State and Utah Valley. Now, granted, they have not played a team even close to Louisville's level. So the Cardinals should end up winning this game. But you have Kentucky on Saturday. So the marathon continues. You have to continue to try to get better and better. Yes, look, having 8 scholarship players is 1,000% going to affect this season. It's going to affect the stamina of this team. any team that has this many injuries to deal with, they're going to struggle as well. But still, that doesn't mean that there are things that you can't critique about what you saw on the court for Louisville. And that's exactly what we're doing. So the hope is that Louisville can snap their losing streak on Wednesday when UTEP comes to town. And we'll discuss what happens in that game when it happens. But like I said, for the remainder of the show, we're going to get back to the football side of things. And what I saw on Sunday from the College Football Playoff Committee, it gave me hope. The decision to put SMU in over Alabama is encouraging for Jeff Brohm's program moving forward. And we'll explain why when we come back on this Monday edition of the Locked On Louisville podcast. We've been keeping it locked on right here at FanDuel all season long. FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook, and I wish this was offered to me, but I've been on FanDuel quite some time. If you're new, you can place a $5 bet and get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app has given me everything that I've needed to place live bets on the NFL. Live bets have started to become my thing. Pretty risky, but FanDuel is really fair, and it gives you every opportunity to make some very quick money. When you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. It was about time that the College Football Playoff Committee redeemed themselves. We talked last year when the last 14 playoff selection show came out and Florida State, an undefeated team, got left out of the playoff. We talked about how the perception of the ACC had never been lower. And that's why we talked about how all offseason that if you don't win 10 games in the ACC, you're 1,000% not going to make it in. And even if you do win 10, things are going to get a little challenging because Miami, they won 10. Lost 2 games by a combined 9 points. They did not make the field. But SMU went into the ACC championship game with 11-1 record. And there was talk that if they lost that game, that they were going to get left out in favor of a 9-3 SEC team. Sparking conversation to the point to where if a conference championship game is meant to be a reward at the end of the year for a good season, then how can losing that game hurt your playoff hopes? Well, it created a running joke that SMU shouldn't even play in the game. Of course they did because there was an automatic bid on the line and a first-round bye as well. SMU ended up losing on a game-winning field goal. 11-2. And they moved down to, number 13 in the AP poll or number 12 in the AP poll. And it created some conversation as to whether or not the committee was going to give the nod to an SMU team that had handled business all year or to an Alabama team who was 9-3. They had the strength of record. They had the strength of schedule, a clear nod to them over SMU. But the losses, 2 losses to Vanderbilt, who was 6-6, and a blowout loss to Oklahoma, who was also 6-6. So the question at hand was the College Football Playoff Committee going to award results or were they going to reward strength of schedule? Now, it's not all black and white. Like I said, this operates in the gray area, so it might not necessarily be the same every year. But as a Louisville fan, you should 100% be encouraged by how the committee decided because they opted to go with results over strength of schedule. They prioritized winning your games versus, well, you lost some games you shouldn't have, but the rest of your schedule was tough. And I know that because and also what happened there is not only does that help winning your games because Louisville's never, in my opinion, going to have like a top 15 strength of schedule unless the ACC just gets really, really, really good. But it also just so happens that SMU is an ACC team. So that helps that the ACC got 2 teams into the playoff. Now, what also needs to happen is you need Clemson and SMU to do well in the playoff because it's going to reaffirm and just justify the committee's decision to include SMU. So those two things alone give you hope moving forward. Now, there's this whole argument that, well, if strength of schedule doesn't matter, then why schedule tough out-of-conference games? And I see that point of view. I respect it, but I disagree with it. Because I looked at what happened, and I didn't think that it was 100% a strength of schedule issue. It was, who did you lose to? Winning the games in front of you. And in my opinion, not just because I'm biased, I think that's the way it should be. Like, there's this whole running joke line, the hypothetical Alabama team should be in the playoff because the hypothetical Alabama team would beat SMU. That same Alabama team that also got embarrassed by a 6-6 Oklahoma team and beat against a Vanderbilt team that finished 6-6. It wasn't like their out-of-conference schedule was tougher either. So I understand like the merit behind the, well, why are we scheduling tougher out-of-conference games? Really, that's not what you should be focusing on. The focus should be on not losing to middle-of-the-road 6-6 SEC teams. SEC is, in my opinion, still the best conference in football. But it's not like it has been in years past. There's a ton of parity in college football. And it was nice to see the committee not siding with the SEC bias that we have seen for the entirety of my 26-year lifetime. And that's not to say that it's always going to be like that, because I think that every situation is going to be different. And I think that, look, if Alabama is 10-2, they're making the playoff. And it's probably not even a discussion. But you have 3 losses. SMU had 1. Now, again, I will acknowledge Alabama's strength of schedule, strength of record, the top 25 wins. That is a case to be made. But was also a case to be made is not having bad losses on your schedule. The only SMU loss was to BYU. BYU wasn't a bad team this year. I say all that, and I go on this long rant to just suggest that the way that the College Football Playoff Committee decided bodes well for Louisville. Because if Louisville's ever going to be in contention for a college football playoff spot and they don't win the conference, you best believe there's going to be SEC teams with more losses that are going to be in the conversation. But it seems like a precedent is being set that, hey, look, you can talk about strength of schedule all you want, but we value winning games on your schedule. Everything's not always the same, but I feel like if you're a Louisville fan, you should be encouraged with SMU getting into the playoff. Like I said, we are going to try to capture the madness that this month is going to bring as much as we can on this show. We'll try to keep you updated and informed as much as we can. We'll try to navigate the wildness that December will bring as much as we can. That's going to wrap up this Monday edition of the show. Everyone have a great day. We'll see you right back here tomorrow.